Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I'm joined by Andrea Leonard-Segal, a board-certified rheumatologist and clinical associate professor at George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Andrea became interested in mind-body medicine years ago and worked collaboratively with Dr. Sarno himself for over 20 years. She also wrote one of the chapters in his masterpiece, The Divided Mind, which helped me get better from my chronic back pain. I am thrilled to have her on today. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and I'll get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in one of my seminars or purchase any of my mind-body guides, also known as PDFs, at www.crushingdoubt.org. Andrea, it's such a pleasure having you here, and I actually just wanted you to know, even before we get started, that to me you feel like a little bit of an old friend because you wrote a chapter in The Divided Mind that really helped me immensely. All of those chapters did, but to actually have you sitting here with me after I remember that book and how it helped me with my recovery. So it's such an honor to have you here.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to speak with you this morning.
So we have lots to talk about as far as I'm concerned. And the place that I wanted to start with is kind of where I always start, which is kind of how did you first become connected to mind-body experience? Was this a personal experience? Was it something professional? Did you encounter Dr. Sarno professionally, but not related to symptoms? Just break that down for me.
Sure. Well, first of all, I didn't learn anything about this in medical school. They did not teach this in medical school. And so my first encounter really was when I developed an episode of back pain that sort of hung around and I couldn't get rid of. And I was hanging out with a friend one day whose mother had been a patient of Dr. Sarno's, who actually the mother had lived in his building. And she gave me a copy of his very first book, which was called Mind Over Back Pain, which he subsequently did not consider to be a book that people ought to pay a lot of attention to because it was just the very beginnings. It contained the very beginnings of his thinkings in this area. But I found the book to be rather engrossing. And I also had an aunt who lived in New York. I don't live in New York. I live in the DC area. And my aunt had been a patient of his. And so I decided that I would go up to New York and pay him a visit. And when I recovered from my back pain, which I did, I subsequently went up to New York to listen to him speak to patients because I became very interested in his words. And so I spent a few days with him, and he taught me more as a mentor how to convey language to patients who were suffering with these kinds of problems.
I can't wait to hear about what your interaction was like with him, but I just wanted to make a note of a couple things. One, the book Mind Over Back Pain I do find is brilliant. All four books are brilliant, but I kind of, if I'm going to assign a book to somebody, I ask them about their reading style. And if they want something really quick, I use Mind Over Back Pain still because it really gets the basic idea across. It's fantastic.
Well, it certainly got the idea across to me. But he found subsequently that actually Healing Back Pain, which was the next book that he wrote, had conveyed the concepts he thought better. And he also felt that the ideas were more gelled, and so he was able to write about them more effectively in that book, he felt.
Yeah, and look, it's absolutely, it's true what he's saying, but I think there was a use to each one. The mind-body prescription I find is particularly useful about anatomy and how it lines up. And then The Divided Mind to me is his absolute masterpiece. It's just like it brings together everything. And not only does it bring together everything, but because there are other doctors, and this is something I wanted to talk with you about, the importance of medical doctors in this, to me, was huge. The fact that Dr. Sarno was an MD, and not only an MD, but an MD of the highest degree, that made a huge difference to me. And so I was thinking about that. as it relates to medical school and why people don't learn about these things in medical school. And I wondered, what's your take on it now, looking back all these years later? What should medical schools, what should they be doing, and why aren't they doing it?
Well, I think that they need to run a curriculum that integrates mind-body work into everything that they do, because there isn't any system of the body that isn't affected in some way or another with mind-body type symptoms. Every system is vulnerable to mind-body types of complaints. And so, but I think that the issue is that there's still a lack of appreciation among general physicians about mind-body medicine. I think that there's less resistance to the notion of it now than there was when I got interested in this work 40 years ago. But I think we've come a way forward since that time. But I do think that there are an awful lot of doctors who don't really grab onto the concept well. They sort of have a sense maybe, but they don't really grab onto it. And they certainly don't know how to teach patients about it because they don't really understand it well.
Yeah, it's very generalized. They'll say things like stress can cause pain and illness, but they're not saying how or what the mechanism is or why or how far it goes. And I just want to say, God bless you for saying that all systems can be affected by this, because one of the things that I say, and I learned it from Dr. Sarno and from you guys in The Divided Mind, all these different systems, they really work the same. The mind-body system is functional in every system. So if the way I say it is, if the body can do it for purely physical reasons, it can be co-opted for mind-body reasons. Now, how far does that go? Obviously, we've got to discuss that and see. And I'm going to ask you about rheumatology because you're a rheumatologist. But before we do that, I don't want to skip past your relationship with Dr. Sarno, because you have a special relationship with him. And I wondered if you could talk about, because you became close friends with him over the years, as I understood it.
I did. He first was my mentor, and then when I felt well, and actually he had said to me, "You're going to have trouble getting better from this because you're a rheumatologist and you've been taught all the other stuff, but not this. So you're going to have to undo what you've been taught to get better." And he was right. I did have to do that, and that was quite a mental exercise. But once I was better, he started sending patients to me in Washington. And so I became a collaborator. He had so many people that tried to see him from all over the country, and he was very busy. And so he was very happy to have a colleague. There were actually, I think when I started doing this work, there was one other colleague that was doing it. I think it was Dr. Schechter in California.
Yep, sure.
So there were just the two of us, to the best of my recollection at that time. And he would send patients to me who called from the DC area and from basically anywhere south of Pennsylvania, and also basically east of the Mississippi. I mean, I was getting patients from all over the place, and this relationship blossomed because I felt that he was referring his contacts to me, and I wanted him to be engaged in my thinking about the patients, and so we would talk about them. And so we developed this very close collaborative relationship. And then if I saw a patient that came to me just because they had heard of me and had an unusual presentation, we would discuss those things too. So I think that together we were able to enhance understanding of this diagnosis. And I certainly know he enhanced it for me. I think that there might have been a few times when I enhanced it for him. Mm-hmm. And over the time, we became friends. And he was a very generous, brilliant person, who was interested in everything and very kind and an extraordinary listener and observer. And as a friend, he was just marvelous. He had a great sense of humor. Things that people may not know about him is that he read Shakespeare and Sherlock Holmes every night before he went to sleep. And he could quote lines from both as if they were just part of him. And he would burst into song at periods of time. He had a wonderful voice. I mean, I think he could have sung at the Met. He was just absolutely a dream of a human being, just terrific. So, yeah,
This is kind of mind-blowing to hear, actually, because Sherlock Holmes was my childhood hero. I had no idea that Dr. Sarno loved Sherlock Holmes. But, there's so much Sherlock Holmes in him.
Watson.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, sure. But even so, same story. And the thing is, Dr. Watson or Sherlock Holmes, they both appreciate deductive reasoning and thinking about what is. And this is the thing. There's so many things about Dr. Sarno that grabbed me. I mean, that book, those 4 books, but The Divided Mind especially, is so magical for me because it captured a couple of things that are so important. One, there is that Sherlock Holmes vibe. Pay attention to what's happening. Don't let illogic steer you away from it. Focus on what is. And so I love hearing that. I'm also a huge Shakespeare fan and I sing. So I'm like, oh my God. I'm really in the Dr. Sarno tree.
Isn't that wonderful? Let me tell you one of his first observations.
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to know the genesis of this?
I do.
People know the pearl, the genesis of this. Back in the 70s, I guess it was, he used to direct the outpatient department of the Rusk Institute, the rehabilitation center.
Yep.
At NYU. And he was treating a couple of patients with back pain, and they had the same anatomy. And one of them was doing beautifully, and the other one wasn't. And he's scratching his head and he's saying, what the heck is going on here? Why is this one getting better and this one isn't? And he had an aha moment. And he said, because he was doing the same thing with them. At the time, the therapy was the same. They were in the same physical therapy. They were probably taking the same medicines, whatever. And he made the observation that the one that was getting better had the better relationship with him.
Mm-hmm.
That patient trusted him more than the other one.
Wow.
And that moment was the beginning of his move towards mind-body medicine for these patients and TMS. And he had had a lot of experience prior to becoming a physiatrist, practicing general medicine. So he had had a lot of time that he had spent with general patients and listening to them and taking care of them. So he had a very broad medical experience. Anyway, that was the genesis. And that's where it began.
Arthur Conan Doyle would be proud. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
I believe so.
I was thinking...
Whoever wrote Shakespeare would be proud.
Right, exactly. I was thinking, though, one of the things that really affected me a lot in reading Dr. Sarno's book is his generosity. You can feel it in the book. He wants you to be powerful. He wants you to not be afraid. He's collaborative with you, the reader. That's how it felt to me. And everything that I've investigated about it really shows that is the case. And you're saying, really, that's what he was like with you. He didn't hold you at arm's length. You tell me if I'm right about this, but it seems like he would bring in anybody who was really open to it, and he would make them the best they could be, and he was willing to take information from them and learn from them too. He's just such a remarkable person, and so that was my reading of him in the book. But I'm hearing you say it, and I'm like, and when I talked to Arlene Feinblatt, it was the same thing. I was like, yeah, he's the guy I thought he was in this book.
Yeah. He's all of that and more.
Yeah. And so it must have felt really good to you that he wanted you to be powerful. He wanted you to grow into this. And he would have needed help. I'm actually finding the same thing a little bit in where I'm sitting. The demand is getting really high, which is wonderful, but I need people that I can rely on. I need to bring them in. I need to make them powerful. And one thing I love about what you did is you're so respectful of what he did, what he achieved, and you incorporated it and brought it to rheumatology, but more. And so now I want to shift gears and talk about you and what you found in working as a rheumatologist in relation to this, because like Sarno said, there was a lot to unlearn in rheumatology. Can you talk about that first? What did you have to unlearn?
Well, one thing that I had to unlearn was the concept that the usual treatments for things, I'd say for about 50% of rheumatology, meaning the patients with back pain and the patients with fibromyalgia and the patients with neck pain and the patients with tennis elbow and that whole cadre of patients. The therapies were not well rooted. And I went back to the literature because I'm academically leaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to recognize that the literature that was supporting the treatments that we were doing was really not representative of necessarily good science.
Right.
And I wrote about that in my chapter in The Divided Mind when he invited me to do a chapter in that book, because he reached out to 5 or 6 of us that he had by that point developed a relationship with and developed confidence in, to each contribute a chapter. And when he asked me what I would like to write about, I said, I'd like to write about my experience taking care of patients, but I also want to do an analysis of the literature so that people can understand that the treatments that they have been experiencing are not necessarily solid ground to walk on. And so that was what I did. And because people would say, well, where's the evidence that what you're doing is correct? No one's writing about it. No one's in it. And it wasn't written about much because as much as he tried, he couldn't get published.
Oh.
He only had a few articles that were published. He did some studies of his patients, some surveys and some analyses, mostly with historical controls, following people with a long pain history and then seeing their outcomes after he had worked with them and educated them. And he tried to get these things published, and these articles that he submitted were mostly rejected, except by some of the psychological type journals. And so people would say, well, this is, where does this come from? Why is this good? And because we've got articles on this and that. And Cochrane, I don't know if you know what the Cochrane Library is. The Cochrane Review.
I don't actually.
It's a large group of people. I think they're based in England that do meta-analyses of the literature on different specific topics, and they had researched virtually all of the different treatments that were used to take care of people with back pain and different kinds of modalities, like the benefits of ultrasound, for example, for treating this, that, or the other thing. So I wanted to do this because I wanted to convey to people that an open-minded, educational treatment is at least as valuable as what the literature says these other modalities do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I went off on a tangent there. I've forgotten actually
No,
the
well,
initial.
first of all, it's a good tangent because I'm always learning too. So like it's the Cochrane Institute. Is that what you said it
The
was?
Cochrane Library. Yeah.
Cochrane Library. Okay. So now I'm going to check that out because I have to find out more. But I do want to say this, and I don't think this was a tangent at all, because this is part of what was helpful to me about your chapter. Each of those doctors, they approached it a different way. And the fact that I got it from all different angles is a part of how I've modeled what I do.
Mhm.
I bring convergent evidence so that it's just overwhelming. And your addition was really, really crucial. And so thank you so much for it. You have no idea how much it helped me. And you've helped thousands and thousands of people that way with that chapter. So what I wanted to ask was, this is a specific question because I get asked about rheumatoid arthritis. And I want to know how to think about this from a mind-body perspective. Can you shed some light on that, or just tell me how you think about that?
Okay. Well, I wish I had a good answer for you. I do not. I've
Okay.
thought about this a lot. And do I think that rheumatoid arthritis is a mind-body problem or has mind-body components? Well, I think everything has a mind-body component, but
Right.
I the problem with a condition like rheumatoid arthritis is that the inflammatory process is so significant and can lead to damage that is irreversible.
Right.
That it really cannot be allowed to run unaddressed for a period of time. And so, from my perspective, I think it's important for people to take medicine
Mm-hmm.
that has been demonstrated to be effective in randomized placebo-controlled double-blind trials.
Right.
And I also think that people with rheumatoid arthritis can benefit from a psychological approach. So my approach to patients with RA is to tell them that I think that they need to be on medication to preserve their joints and reduce the inflammatory process that can occur in other areas as well. And and that I think that they could also benefit from having psychotherapy. And so that is what I do. I
So,
think, let me just say this as well,
yeah.
because I didn't say it earlier. I think it's really important for patients to see a physician when they have a medical issue ongoing who can hopefully make a diagnosis of a mind body problem to them, but also rule out anything else that might be serious.
Yeah. I just
And,
wanted to say, oh, go ahead.
and I feel that also, when you have someone that can do that work, I think it also gives people the confidence to stop worrying about their physical condition. And you know that it's the fear and the worry that perpetuates
Absolutely.
these mind body symptoms. And so I have concerns, and I recognize I'm a physician, but I'm going to convey to you also what Dr. Sarno felt about this, which is exactly what I'm saying to you, that it's very important for people to get examined and get a proper diagnosis prior to then embarking on psychotherapy treatment first.
Yeah.
That's
So I think you will be pleased by my thinking about this because it is in line with this. I'm very careful about the fact that I don't treat anyone for this stuff if they haven't seen medical doctors and gotten properly checked out, because, and it's exactly what you said, if there are things that are irreversible, the medical side needs to be looking at that and needs to be treated medically. I'm 100% on board with that, and to me, that's the delineating factor. First, we rule out anything medical, and we get anything that could be irreversible or anything life or death, any of that, but not just life or death, irreversible things.
Mm-hmm.
That I depend on the medical doctors for. And one of the things that I love about mind-body work is just interesting to me is that there has to be a bridge that we have between medical doctors and the mental health side of things.
Exactly.
And I try to fit in the right place about that. And but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is it's so important for people to hear from medical doctors who get this. It's just so important. And you were able to break it down very nicely about where is that delineation point?
Well, I look at it as my role when I make a diagnosis is to move people from the physical to the psychological. That's my role.
Yeah.
I have
Right.
some patients in just hearing that I think it's not physically oriented who get better. That doesn't mean that they don't suffer the symptom imperative, but that set of symptoms disappears. And then they might have another one. Sometimes they call me. And if it's round robining, then I refer them for psychotherapy. And I tell everyone I see that they could benefit from psychotherapy. It's up to them as to whether or not they feel that they want to embark on that. Some people have concerns about finances related to it, et cetera. But when there are people that are struggling, I push hard for them to do it.
Mm-hmm. It's wonderful that it's just wonderful to have you out there. We need doctors like you, and the ones that Dr. Sarno really created a whole network, and the people who follow him are so trustworthy and wonderful. So we're lucky to have all of them. I wanted to ask another question though. If I understand this correctly, you now advise pharmaceutical companies. Is that correct?
Well, I see patients, but
Right.
I also have another piece of my career where for a number of years I directed a division at the Food and Drug Administration in
Right.
the drug center. And so, yes, I do some consulting on drug development issues.
So one of the questions I had is, I'm curious what your take is on antidepressants, because there's also questions about the opioid crisis. There's many things we could go into, but one of the things I wanted to ask about is antidepressants, because people ask me sometimes, what's mind-body with respect to antidepressants and whether they should be used. Some people talk about that anxiety and depression are a form of the symptom imperative, or at least they can be.
Mm-hmm.
I have certainly found that to be the case. I think the question is, well, how far does that go? When should we use what? So I just wondered if you could touch base about antidepressants. What role do you see them playing for people, and how do you talk about that with the pharmaceutical companies, if at all?
Well, I've never had that conversation with a pharmaceutical company, but I
Okay.
can tell you that that from my perspective, I think that when patients are very, very depressed and very, very anxious, um, and at danger of harming themselves, or are at the point where they may not be doing that or thinking about that, or may not have ever tried that, but yet life has really come to a halt in many ways. I think that prescribing medicine that can help to alleviate that is a great thing. I am not for people suffering.
Yeah.
And I think it's reasonable to prescribe. What's interesting about antidepressants, just so that I don't know if people appreciate this, is it's very difficult to prove efficacy. That's because the placebo rate in those trials is so incredibly high.
Right.
So to demonstrate a significant difference in alleviating depression between the active drug arm and the placebo arm is very, very difficult.
Yep.
And so I think there is a very strong placebo effect when people go on an antidepressant as well, but it does not really matter as long as they are feeling better and then can get to a level where they can work better and work through their issues more effectively.
I couldn't agree more. You just said it beautifully. It's really about, they shouldn't have to suffer so much, and then we will find our way. You know, my first step is let's get the suffering under control as much as we can.
Yeah.
And then we let the mind body work take over. So I'm thrilled to hear you say it that way too, because I completely agree. I wanted to ask you one last question, and then I will let you go. Thank you for your time. I sometimes wonder about, when are we going to get to a tipping point? When are we going to get to a tipping point where med schools start teaching this, where your average person thinks this way, where your average doctor takes it beyond just, yes, stress causes some problems? Do you feel we're approaching that tipping point at all? Have you seen movement in recent years?
Well, I see my patients at the GW Center for Integrative Medicine, and I do teach medical students there. Sometimes residents do a little rotation through. So I hope that I'm teaching people to listen differently to patients and to think psychologically when they listen to patients. And I hope that they're hearing my words when I speak with patients, so that they learn how to communicate the concept of the role of psychology in physical symptoms without people walking away and thinking, she said it's all in my mind, which is what I have never said that.
Nope.
But people come up with those kinds of notions about mind body when people speak to them that way. So I try to convey that. I have a son who finished medical school a few years ago. And at his medical school, there was a specific program, but yet he never learned the work that Dr. Sarno was doing, and he was not taught it. He was just taught that stress can play a role in things, but he was not given any tools as to how to work with that. So I think it's coming. I think there will be a tipping point. I think there's more interest. These kinds of programs did not exist when I was in training, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but I've seen movement, and one of the ways that I think about this is when I hear the "it's in your head" thing, I say, no, it's not in your head. It's from your head and real in the body.
Exactly.
And I just wanted to thank you again, Andrea. It's been wonderful catching up with you, to get that window into Dr. Sarno, to find out about you. And I think you did a brilliant job of representing all of these different things, so that we can think about where do things apply. But I wanted to ask you a small favor, though, before you go.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind, you're still friends with Dr. Sarno's wife.
I am.
And, first of all, I would love to speak with her if she's willing to, but she doesn't have to, but I'd love to reach out to her. But the one favor you can do is, I want to find out, what were Dr. Sarno's favorite Shakespeare plays? I really want to know.
I don't think I know the answer to that question.
But she probably would.
She probably would. And I will, I'll reach out to her and see if I can find that out for you.
I really appreciate it, Andrea.
Do you want to know his favorite chapter in Sherlock Holmes as well?
I do, yes.
We'll see what we can do about that.
Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure and an honor, and thank you for all of the work that you've done in your career, the chapter that you gave to me and so many others, and your generosity. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure, Dan. It's really nice to know that someone like you is out there helping patients. It's very nice to meet you.
Thanks so much. You too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Well, it's kind of hard to represent how much that kind of interview means to me, because Andrea's chapter in The Divided Mind is something that I really treasure. Every part of that book was my lifeline back then. And so to have her on and get to talk to her about the chapter, who she is, and her work with Sarno was really mind-blowing. On top of it, I love to get to hear some personal stories about Dr. Sarno. I was particularly excited to learn about his connection to Sherlock Holmes, because I really do have that. And in the meantime, it's not surprising based on what I saw of him. Lastly, I just want to highlight that Dr. Sarno did have a way of wanting other people to be powerful. And he wasn't scared of them. He wanted to help them grow, and he saw them. And that's what I felt in reading his book, and that's what you see in his interactions with Andrea. So it was a pleasure having her on, not only for the history of Dr. Sarno, but also for the way that she works with her patients. What an honor to have her on. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I will get back to you personally.